Callisto is a moon of Jupiter. It is the third largest moon in the solar system and second largest Jovian moon after Ganymede. With a diameter of 4,820 kilometers, Callisto's diameter is by 1,300 kilometers longer than the diameter of the moon. And Callisto's diameter is by only 60 kilometers narrower than the diameter of the planet Mercury. Its surface area is heavily cratered, and because there is no geologic activity, there is also no volcanic activity and tectonic shift occurring on the surface. It is also why it has one of the oldest and most heavily cratered surface in the solar system. Callisto has an average density of 1.8 grams per centimeter cubic, which is 3 times less than the average density of Earth. This means that its composition is roughly 50% ice and 50% rock. Its low density is also why it has the lowest gravity out of all the major Jovian moons, although not by much. So it's pretty clear that Callisto is a pretty big moon that has some unique characteristics. But why is this a moon that we would want to colonize? Well, its positioning in the solar system and conditions are very friendly to humans in many regards. For starters, the surface radiation present on Callisto is relatively very low. It is 0.1 millisieverts a day. Now, that is more than 10 times the surface radiation present on Earth. Still, even 10 times higher surface radiation than on Earth isn't enough to cause serious health problems if some precautions are made. Even when comparing Callisto's surface radiation to the other major moons of Jupiter, we can see that it is 360,000 times less than on Io, 54,000 times less than on Europa, and 800 times less than on Ganymede. And we should also compare this surface radiation to Mars's, which is usually the place that is considered for colonization. The surface radiation on Mars averages around 0.7 millisieverts a day. So on Callisto, people would receive on average roughly 7 times less radiation compared to the surface of Mars. So that is a very useful condition in order for colonization to occur. But still, it is completely possible that by the time we are colonizing Callisto, we would know how to deal with radiation so much better that the levels of radiation present on Mars won't even be a slight problem. Callisto, out of all the major Jovian moons, is orbiting Jupiter at its farthest, at a distance of 1,880,000 kilometers, which is around 5 times the distance that our moon orbits the Earth. Its distance from Jupiter is also why the radiation levels present on its surface are so low compared to other Jovian moons that are much closer. So then the first step that we would need to take to begin the colonization is determining where the first colony should be created. This is approximately how Callisto would look to the naked eye, and the best location to settle into would be near a pure water ice patch. There are many of these patches, and they are usually present on elevated surfaces such as crater rims and slopes. These pure water ice patches, which reflect 4 times more light than the rest of the surface, are surrounded and mixed in with darker patches that are not as pure and are a mix of ice and rock. Then those patches are mixed with patches that are even darker than that and contain almost entirely non-ice material. So having a source of relatively pure water ice could be useful for producing oxygen, even though it might not be drinkable in liquid form. Even if it turns out that that layer of pure water ice and those small patches is very thin, then won't be much of a problem, as water ice is abundant in general on the surface of Callisto. After we determined an exact spot, the next step wouldn't be to just send humans directly to this location. Rather, it would be to send all of the equipment required for human survival. That equipment could be sent there with many different rockets, each delivering a different essential thing. So first of all, we would need to send constructed bases. Now it's possible that these bases could also be constructed on Callisto with 3D printing machines that have artificial intelligence. They could be constructed with the material present on the darker regions that are not icy. These bases would just need to be insulated and pressurized with air. But as of right now, we don't have that technology yet. In order for those bases to be functional in terms of survival, they would need to fulfill oxygen, water, and food requirements. They would also need to have an energy source in order to power all of the electrical equipment that those humans would use. For a food source, by far the simplest solution would be to just send huge quantities of food tanks. Although growing food in space was achieved, specifically lettuce was grown and eaten on the ISS, we still can't grow food in space in the quantities which would allow us to sustain human existence. Although it is very much possible that by the time we are colonizing Callisto, we are going to achieve such a thing. Still, even if that does happen, sending tanks of food that contain all of the nutrients required for optimal survival is going to be a simpler solution to the problem. If we create a rocket that can carry a 30,000 to 40,000 kilogram payload, and such a rocket can be created, then we could just send that rocket to deliver 30,000 kilograms or more worth of food on that location on Callisto. And if we do that 7 times, then we would stock up on a lifetime worth of food for 7 people. Solving the problem of drinkable water has the same solution as the problem with food, meaning again we could just send huge quantities of water tanks. But for oxygen, a good solution would be to just send oxygen generators. Currently, there are 2 oxygen generators present on the International Space Station. Generators are a primary method for creating oxygen for the humans inside the space station. So we could just send a bunch of oxygen generators that can utilize water from that water ice present on Callisto. These generators utilize a process called electrolysis to create oxygen. By passing an electrical current through water, that makes it so that 2 hydrogen molecules are split away from the oxygen molecule. So they could just vent out the hydrogen and leave the oxygen inside the base, just like how it is done on the ISS. Now, the problem of energy so that electrical devices could be powered has as well a very simple solution, which is solar panels. Callisto is far away from the Sun, at 779 million kilometers, which is 5 times longer than the distance between the Earth and the Sun. Sun appears about 5% as bright from Callisto compared to how the Sun appears on the Earth, so solar panels won't be as efficient as they are here on Earth. Still, Callisto gets enough sunlight to not make solar panels obsolete. If we send a lot of them, they would be able to power the bases without a problem. So now that we covered the most basic stuff needed by sending equipment to Callisto for decades in order so that the colony could be kept alive, we could finally start sending actual humans to Callisto. Callisto is 628 million kilometers away from the Earth at its closest, which is around 11 times longer than the closest distance between Earth and Mars. Considering that there are probes such as Voyager 1 and 2 which were able to reach Jupiter within around 600 days, it is not that crazy to imagine that we could create a spacecraft that could sustain the existence of a couple of humans for a year and a half. We could even utilize the hibernation technique called therapeutic hypothermia to put humans in a state of hibernation inside the spacecraft. Their bodies would receive everything needed through infusion in order to survive that year and a half of space travel. But that spacecraft would also need to protect them from the radiation of outer space that could be potentially significantly damaging to the human organism on such a long trip. They could be protected by building thick walls around the cabin in which those humans are, with a material that can shield from radiation well. For example, one such material is polyethylene, a typical plastic that grocery bags and water bottles are made out of. It has high hydrogen content, and hydrogen atoms are good at absorbing and dispersing radiation. Now, that's just one material that might be very useful in that regard. Likely many more are going to come into consideration. Now, when they finally reach Callisto and they wake up, their lives on Callisto would be mostly spent in those bases. So naturally, they would need to have all of the right equipment to keep them sane but also alive, such as exercising equipment to prevent muscle atrophy, as the gravity on Callisto is around 8 times less than the gravity present on Earth, which means inside the base, without any extra added weight, they would feel 8 times lighter compared to the surface of Earth. Now, such a low gravity might pose some health problems in the long run that are not as easily preventable as muscle atrophy. Although it is also entirely possible that such gravity might not pose any serious health problems. We don't know yet. Those humans would be able to perform many science experiments and determine a lot of things, specifically about the origin and evolution of Callisto. But by far the most interesting experiment would be to determine whether or not Callisto has a subsurface water ocean. We are almost certain with the amount of evidence that we have that moons such as Europa and Enceladus have subsurface water oceans, but it could turn out that that is a feature that is present on a lot more moons. It's just that they have fewer indications of a subsurface ocean being present. One such indication for Callisto is the fact that it was found that Callisto's magnetic field varies, meaning it flows in different directions at different times, in response to the background magnetic field generated by Jupiter. The reason that there is this response is likely because of liquid water beneath the surface that can conduct electrical current well. So those humans would be able to tell whether or not Callisto has an ocean with high certainty by drilling into the surface. If it turns out that Callisto does have a subsurface ocean, and there is a huge chance of there being one, then those humans could send a submarine through the drilled hole in order to explore the ocean with cameras, light, and all sorts of other tools. They could also get a sample of that water so that it could be seen as to what that water contains. With that sample, we could also see if there is some form of life living in that ocean. If anything is found, then it would most likely be a very simple form of life, similar to single-celled organisms that we have here on Earth. Now, Callisto is tidally locked, meaning Callisto does spin, but it needs the same amount of time of 17 days to complete a full spin around its axis as it does to complete its orbit around Jupiter. So one side of Callisto is always facing Jupiter, while the other one is always facing away from Jupiter. Now, with that, I'm also assuming that the location which was picked for the colony is located on the side of Callisto from which Jupiter is visible. Jupiter would appear 50 times larger from Callisto compared to how our moon appears from Earth. Because of that, the surface features and changes on Jupiter's surface would be directly visible and be pretty clear with a naked eye. As those humans would go on about exploring the surface features of Callisto, they would notice that it is very dim there. Most of the surface, besides icy patches, would be as bright as a cloudy day here on Earth, or even dimmer in the regions with darker materials that do not reflect a lot of light. As the humans there would continue exploring the surface, they would notice that the features are pretty simple and that there is not much variation. The largest things they could come across are craters, and lots of them. But from their point of view, they would just see many fractures, big slopes, knobs and valleys, with occasional smooth, dark terrain. One of the most interesting things they could come across would be the areas which have a huge number of eroding ice spikes that go up to 100 meters in height. Likely, these spikes were formed from the ejecta of impacts that happened far in the past. Now, they would be able to explore a big part of their local area just by walking in their spacesuits. Although the icy surface might pose some problems, there are ways of dealing with that easily. Still, they would not be able to explore the entirety of the surface area on Callisto just by walking, so vehicles that run on wheels could be sent there in order for travel to be more efficient. Or even that might not be the best option, due to a surface that goes up and down in extreme amounts. A more viable option would actually be travel with flight. That's right, we could send a machine that would be able to lift off the surface, carry humans with them, and travel to any spot on Callisto. Due to 8 times less gravity than on the surface of the Earth, the amount of energy that would be needed in order to achieve flight is also a lot less. Callisto has a surface area which is 7 times smaller than Earth's surface area, meaning traveling throughout the entirety of Callisto's surface is going to be very fast. Earth has a circumference of 40,000 kilometers. Callisto has a circumference of 15,000 kilometers. The average commercial jet flies at a speed of about 850 kilometers an hour, which means that the average jet needs 2 days to go around the whole circumference of the Earth. But if that plane-like machine were to go at the same speed on Callisto, it would be able to complete a whole path around the circumference in 17 hours. Callisto's atmosphere is also super thin, so air resistance won't be a problem like it is here on Earth, which could allow that flying machine to achieve great speeds. As the humans would fly, they would be able to observe the heavily cratered surface in great detail. They would also be able to land and explore the Valhalla multi-ring basin that has a diameter which is 3,800 kilometers, or 3/4 as wide as Callisto's diameter, with a central bright region that is 360 kilometers in diameter. Life on Callisto for these people would be unusual, as they would mostly be confined to the space of the bases they are in, with occasionally getting out to explore the surface and perform experiments. That, plus a week-long daytime and a week-long nighttime, is going to make the life for them very weird, especially for the first couple of people that are on Callisto. They would be hundreds of millions of kilometers away from Earth and everyone else. Most of activities that they were doing on Earth daily previously would be replaced with something radically different. So obviously, they would need to be very mentally strong in order to endure such an experience. They also would have a 30 to 50 minute delay with sending messages to Earth with radio signals. Because 30 to 50 light minutes is usually the distance that two celestial objects are at from each other, light speed needs 30 to 50 minutes to reach Earth from Callisto. Besides the delay in communication that this would create, it would also make it impossible to watch anything in live form from Callisto, as there would always be that huge time delay. This would also cause the internet to be extremely slow if the data is streamed from Earth, but once, for example, video has been streamed fully and sent to Callisto, the video could be viewed without a problem. Now, if it turns out that these humans that are there successfully survive for a decade or more without any serious health problems, then we could continue expanding the colony by sending even more bases, supplies, and humans. And if it turns out that even babies could be created in Callisto's low surface gravity without too many problems, and there is no reason really to think that there would be unsolvable problems there, gene editing could be used to optimize their bodies to the conditions present there. Then the colony could even have a natural population growth by human reproduction. Now, by that point on Callisto, there would be a pretty sizable colony. It would be like a small space town that has branches of bases that serve different purposes. Same with how different buildings in Earth's towns and cities serve different purposes. For example, schools for children that are born there, a form of police, hospitals and clinics so that people could get medical help. Now, likely some form of government would also need to be established in order for this relatively big colony to be functional. What the government would look like in terms of an organization is hard to tell, as there are many ways they could go about organizing it. Now, maybe at a certain point, if the colony can completely sustain itself, then they might even want to declare themselves as an independent form of organization, not tied to the government organizations present on Earth. Or even more interesting would be if the colony divided itself and that there are many different independent governments that occupy Callisto. By this point, if they are self-sustainable, they would be growing their own food. As this is so much into the future, the technology would most likely be there to do that in big enough quantities. There could also be machines with systems that could track any incoming rock from space in order so that the machine could shoot down the rock before directly falling onto the base or any equipment such as the huge fields with solar panels that would power the colony. Although there is a small chance of that happening, it is something that should be implemented just in case. Now, in the really far future, eventually if fusion reactors are developed, they can be used to power the colony there and have facilities which would create rockets that run on fusion power. If that happens, then those humans could start then to establish colonies on other moons of Jupiter and even reach the moons of Uranus and Neptune and colonize them as well. Fusion is a method of generating power by using heat from a nuclear fusion reaction. That's the reaction that happens in the Sun and what causes it to generate an enormous amount of energy. Fusion reactors are devices that gather that energy. But as of right now, no design was successful at generating enough power for it to be a viable option for anything big, although there is some promising progress in that regard. If we assume that human technology advanced as time passed, we could even have the power of terraforming, which is the ability to turn the conditions on other moons and planets to be more hospitable to humans. Now, Callisto is relatively easy to terraform. Currently, Callisto has a very thin atmosphere that is comprised mostly of carbon dioxide. Now, usually objects with gravity similar to Callisto can't hold on to an atmosphere if they are heated to a certain level, although there are examples of places that are very cold, have low gravity, and have a thick atmosphere, such as Titan. But just because Callisto wouldn't be able to hold on to an atmosphere if it has the proper heat, doesn't mean that the atmosphere that would be created would disappear immediately. It would be a process that would take a long time, meaning the humans on that terraformed Callisto would need to replenish the atmosphere, but likely every 1,000 years or even more. In order to create a hospitable atmosphere, we would need to add lots of nitrogen. If ammonia is present on the surface, then by sending lots of bacteria that can turn ammonia into nitrogen, we could add huge amounts of it. After nitrogen is added somehow, a big amount of a very potent greenhouse gas would need to be added. After enough of it is added, and the temperature goes above a certain level, the surface water ice would start to melt, creating a global ocean throughout Callisto. Then, through electrolysis of that water in oceans, oxygen could be added into the atmosphere in huge amounts. Likely, not much land would be left over, if any at all, due to a huge quantity of water ice that melted. Likely bases that were already established would be underwater. At that point, we could save them, or we could just construct bases that would float on this newly created ocean. Then those humans would be able to be outside of their bases without any spacesuits. They would also be able to swim in that newly created ocean. Now, terraforming is something that is currently much less doable, but very likely to be possible in the far future. But just establishing bases on Callisto is even something that could be done with a current level of technology. But as I already said, it would require a ton of work and preparation.